Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Water Distance Education and MBV. Oh, NBV. I said M. NBV3E. Today we're going to take one step ahead now of looking at beliefs, values, and aspirations of Aboriginal peoples, and that is stereotypes. Lesson number 7. We're on page 7. Uh, the learning goals, which I will translate into ways that you can be successful in completing this lesson, is that if you can define the term stereotype in your own head, understand it, what it means, and how it relates to this course, then you will be successful. If you can demonstrate an understanding of the characteristics of Aboriginal nationhood and how the concept is transmitted within and beyond Aboriginal society. Also, if you can demonstrate an understanding of how the cultural heritage of Aboriginal peoples is being challenged, and describe how cross cultural experiences can have an impact on the maintenance of Aboriginal values, attitudes, and beliefs, and also the efforts and the successes of Aboriginal peoples to protect and maintain their culture and languages. So, there's a few words that you should look up uh, before you continue on with this lesson. I won't look them up now, but I'd like you to do that yourself. And they are stereotype, which this lesson embodies that whole topic, skew, bias, and resilience. There's a famous quote by JFK, John F. Kennedy, one of the greatest of American presidents, I think. He says, or he did say, for a subject worked and reworked so often in novels, motion pictures, and televisions, American Indians are the least understood and the mis and most misunderstood Americans of us all. That was 1963, he said that. In this lesson, you will study how the image of Aboriginal peoples has been portrayed through the media. You will discuss how these images help to reinforce the stereotypes that are associated with Aboriginal peoples. You will see how the elder plays a significant role in sustaining Native communities and keeping knowledge and tradition alive. Finally, you will learn how important it is to maintain cultural traditions, knowledge, and values within or with a contemporary society. Media has the ability to influence the beliefs of an entire nation. In this activity, you will have the opportunity to understand the impact of media on perceptions of Native American people. And personally, I can think back to growing up. Now I'm a older person right now, but when I grew up, I would watch TV, and there wasn't very many channels on TV at that time. Bonanza was one of them, right? That was big. Um, Hockey Night in Canada was very common around. But back then, there was a lot of cowboy movies on, and all the time, indigenous people got represented as the enemy, as someone who was, killing all the settlers and and that gave the cowboys a chance to become heroes. It sure has changed a lot since then. I can remember Marlon Brando was supposed to win an Academy Award for his part in, I believe it hmm, was it Apocalypse Now? Oh, he did so many great movies, Marlon Brando. And then he got a young lady. He didn't show up for the awards, but he got a young indigenous woman to show up, and she gave a speech about how indigenous people were portrayed in the movies. And she got a lot of boos from the audience. Those high rolling people who were part of the academy didn't like, what she was saying, and so they booed her on the stage. But this happened in the 1970s, I think, and with the changing of people's attitudes and values in the 70s, there was people were starting to question this stereotype. And how long's it been since then? 50 years. It's hard for me to think like 50 years, uh, and that makes me really feel old. But um, gradually, there have been numerous changes in that, and we're going to look at some of the different forms of media that are available today that can demonstrate that these ideas, these uh, values, these representations uh, have been changing. Um, so you're asked to read page 132 and 1 to 143 in your textbook, and that is, excuse me for a second, I'll bring that up for you. To Unit 2, and we'll just once again just go quickly through the main topics in there so you'll be able to easily identify where they are. Uh, let's see. Oh, not there. That's not what I was looking for. There we go. Okay, 132 to 143. All right. So, what are the topics on those pages? Bear with me while I skim down to those. 132, the problem with stereotypes. All right, so basically, a definition is given of stereotypes here as a generalization about a group of people. Stereotypes and identity. So here we are connecting the topic of lesson number 7 with the previous learning that we did in lesson number 6. Stereotypes in the media. Okay, so there's a lot written about that and the negative impacts. So that's on page 133, stereotypes in the media, and then the negative impacts on page 133. There's where we get that term, skewed. And there's a definition right there. To distort or depict something in order to make it conform to a specific concept, attitude, or planned result. Funny, when you work in some software, some image software like Adobe Photoshop, to skew an image means to twist it all out of proportion. You know how you can do that? And if you don't grab the selection properly, and you grab the wrong points and you drag it, and it gets all distorted. And that's what happens when you depict something in order to make it conform to a specific concept, attitude, or planned result. And then there's a section here on page 34, combating stereotypes. Uh, and one of the ways is for Indigenous people to tell their own stories. There's a fellow there, Maurice Switzer, who talks about that on page 135. Okay, um, and let's see, that is about it for now. Oh, no, 135, we go on to 43. There's a perspective here um, by Kateri Akiwenzi. Now, sports logos. This has come up on the news recently. This is addressed on page 136, 137. And it's been an issue, and you'll notice that a lot of teams have been changing their names in the United States, like the Cleveland Indians, right? They changed their name. A lot of sports teams are doing that. They don't. They believe that these logos, these icons, these images that were created years ago, have negative, stereotypical effects on people, and they certainly do. Um, there's a section here on 138, honor and recognition through sports and games. Also, a neat article on 139 about lacrosse, which is a traditional indigenous name that has grown in popularity throughout the world. The four host First Nations um, article on that, and then awards. So, very positive stories about Indigenous people to finish up the chapter. Okay, so let's go quickly back here now. Okay, fortunately in Canada, and I'm on page 9, the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network is doing a great job of accurately representing the viewpoint of Native American people. So here's a huge media conglomerate now that is representing Aboriginal peoples in a very positive light, not in the stereotypical way, highlighting their achievements. And well, here I'm going to quickly show you the website, okay? Let's see where we go to APTN. Right. Now just pop that up here. All right. So, right on the front page here, sharing the stories only we can tell. APTN has served Indigenous and non-Indigenous audiences in Canada for over 2 decades. That is, it looks like up here in the logo on the left here, it looks like it's been 25 years. To share, let's see, our the network has steadfastly adhered to its mission to share our people's journey, celebrate our cultures, inspire our children, and honor the wisdom of our elders. This is the first national Indigenous broadcaster in the world, and it's available with most networks. APTN. Doesn't matter where you go, you can watch it in Canada. Um, all right, so here there are 3 links. There's the national news, our stories told own way. So this is like a news channel, right? So there are writers who are writing about the chiefs in BC dismayed over um, AFNs. That's the Assembly of First Nations intervention in federal water legisla- legislation work. Okay, so BC's not happy about what AFN's doing, and so they're challenging it, right? And here is Cree filmmaker Neil Diamond. Now, that's not the Neil Diamond that made um, was a famous singer back in the 60s. He explores the West fascination with and misconceptions of indigenous peoples. Very good. So this uh, particular, uh, this is actually, is this a show? Or, I'm going to click on it for you. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's a whole article about that, right? Neat. Okay, I'm going to click back. All right, so there's lots of good news articles written by indigenous writers, newspaper people, who follow the same codes of ethics that all newspaper writers should follow. Um, all right, so look at that. There's tons of pages you can check out. So that's the news end of it, right? Also, though, there's an entertainment section here, APN TV, and that's what I've been most familiar with. So there's actually shows that you can watch series, right? So here is the schedule, right? Northern Exposure. That's always been uh, a big show, um, popular show amongst people. Other ones I don't know so well. Dead Man's Curse. Um, oh, Quest Out West Wild Food. Chuck and the First People's Kitchen. Hmm. Well, that's fascinating. So there's actually, let's see, let's just quickly look at this one. All right, so this is, it looks like a cooking show to me. And I think I can't play any of these videos here because this is an organization, private organization, or and that we don't want to get caught up on rights because a lot of these media organizations are fairly strict about people replaying their videos and things like that. So I won't do that. Uh, I don't think I'll even do it for the news broadcast as well. Spirit Talker, the Beachcombers. Wow, that's an old one, eh? uh, Horse Warriors, Ghost Hunters of the Grand River. That sounds good. And then, of course, they have the news and that. So it's all, um, there's a time listing here for the different days of the week that you can catch your favorite shows. All right, there's documentaries, movies, shows for kids, all listed here. Oh, this is APN Iumi, and this is a streaming platform, right, that you would probably have to pay directly for, just like all the other streaming programs that you see out there, Amazon, Netflix, those types of things. Anyways, so wow, it's just a lot of availability for uh, indigenous based storytelling and the news too, right? I try to separate those two because the news shouldn't really be storytelling like fiction would be, made up stories. I mean, it has to rely on the facts, right? All right, so let's go back to our unit. So APTN, here's a roundup on what APTN is. The first national Aboriginal television network in the world with programming by, for, and about Aboriginal peoples to share with all Canadians as well as viewers around the world. Its launch on September 1st, 1999, represented a significant milestone for Aboriginal Canada. For the first time in broadcast history, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people have the opportunity to share the stories with all of Canada through a national television network dedicated to Aboriginal programming. Through documentaries, news magazines, dramas, entertainment specials, children's series, cooking shows, and education programs, APTN offers all Canadians a window into the remarkably diverse worlds of Indigenous peoples in Canada and throughout the world. Wow, yeah, so there is a lot of food out there for people to enjoy and listen to and view, uh, and you won't see stereotypes in this program or this APTN media network. Headquartered in Winnipeg, Manitoba, APTN offers an unprecedented opportunity for Aboriginal producers, directors, actors, writers, and media professionals to create, innovate, reflective, and relevant programming for Canadian viewers. 70% of APTN programming originates in Canada, with 55% of the programs broadcast in English, 15% in French, and 30% in a variety of Aboriginal languages. In 1998, an Angus Reid survey revealed that two-thirds of Canadians supported the idea of Aboriginal a national Aboriginal TV network, even if it would mean displacing a currently offered service. A subsequent poll conducted by Bolera Research indicated that 68% of Canadians would be willing to pay a 15-cent increase in their monthly cable bill to receive an Aboriginal network. With the strong support for a national network among Aboriginal communities, producers and organizers, and the Canadian public, the CRTC, that's the big umbrella organization that dictates and manages what's acceptable for Canadian TV. It announced in February 1999 that APTN would receive a national broadcast license. Through the efforts of countless Aboriginal television professionals and supporters nationwide, APTN became a reality in September the 1st, 1999, and has become an important entertainment, news, and educational programming choice for over 10 million households in Canada. The dream of a national Aboriginal television network has become a reality, and the rest, as they say, is broadcast history. So, support question number 1 is on page 10. In this activity, you are asked to access or assess various forms, I got mixed up there, various forms of media such as newspapers, magazines, print media, journals, radio, films, movies, television, and the internet for examples of stereotypical portrayal of First Nations. Consider the following questions and prepare to discuss your answers in class. Well, We don't really have that on time, real time class, but it's something that you can talk about with your friends about, referencing the examples that you have found. How do present day media continue to stereotype First Nations people? If possible, watch some of the programming and advertising on APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, and state how the portrayals of this channel are similar and different. How are the First Nation groups beginning to overcome stereotyping? So, examples of ways to challenge and dispel racism and discrimination, artistic expression. There are many Native American artists who have committed a lifetime of work to challenging and changing the negative mindset of Native American people. One example is the visual artist Norval Morrisseau. His work provides examples of beauty and relevance of Native American culture and spirituality. And so Norval, a lot of people are familiar with him. He was one of the innovators of a pretty important art movement. Okay, and he's from the Sandy Lake area, or yeah, Sandy Lake area there, and he picked up on, in his travels on hydroglyphs. Hydroglyphs? Do I have that right? Um, on the river systems not far from Red Lake. Rock paintings. That's what I'm trying to say in a simple fashion. And that's where he got his inspiration from. And he started painting. And around that time, some other artists as well, like Carl Ray, from this area. He spent some time in Sioux Lookout, and a few other uh, artists from our area um, started painting in what would later be known as the woodland style. And so they, as I said, they were inspired from the rock paintings that they seen in the area. And a lot of their images and iconography came from those rock paintings. And that style has continued on. It's changed somewhat. It's morphed, as we would call it, as new artists have different visions to add. Uh, they keep getting creative. That's the thing about artists. They're always creatively looking for or creating something that is personal to them, but then also expresses the culture's inherent spirit. Uh, so, uh, let's see. Now, Norval Morrisseau paintings, it mentions here you can visit the Colin Art Gallery and to see his work. But I mean, if you're in Thunder Bay, go to the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. There's a lot of his work and a lot of the numerous other artists from the area as well. So there was like a group of artists. Now they weren't really connected like, well, they didn't get together for regular meetings like that. Um, but they all seem to tune in to the same style, um, fairly close to the same time. Uh, so Norvell had a huge effect on a lot of younger artists in our area and further east too, in eastern Ontario. There was a huge art movement there as well. They call it the Eastern Woodland style. Um, they their work looked a little bit different. I don't have time right now to really get into uh, the differences in the description of each different type of work. I'd love to do that, but maybe on Friday I'll pull up a couple of paintings and we can talk about them if we have some time, okay? So many Aboriginal artists, musicians, and writers explore themes about identity. There exists a wide variety of Native musicians uh, creating music that challenges oppressive mindsets about Native people. Some Native musicians in Canada include prominent names such as Keith Sakola and Buffy St. Marie. Wait a minute, people are this. This is an older chorus. People are probably a little upset about Buffy being there. You know, this is a real tough one. You know, I've talked to a lot of people about Buffy St. Marie, Indigenous peoples, and you know what? They felt much more hurt about the negative messages that were coming out from the media about Buffy St. They still felt they didn't feel betrayed by Buffy St. Marie, is what I'm saying. She always had this connection with a lot of Indigenous people. She's was adopted by a tribe out in, where was that, Saskatchewan, I think, right? But there's been all kinds of disputes going on, mainly from her family, bad talking her, and so it's an issue that, like all issues, there's no right or wrong. People just have to discuss things. I think this all comes from this attacks. These attacks on Buffy St. Marie are that now they're finding like government officials and um, academics, like professors, who are being challenged about their claims to be indigenous. Uh, because some people, for one reason or the other, um, uh, uh, cla falsely claim to be indigenous. So there's also anti-racism organizations. Okay, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation is committed to the elimination of racism in Canada. A special interest, uh, the CRRS publication of an inspiring report titled "Learning About Walking in Beauty: Placing Aboriginal Perspectives in Canada." Okay, and placing Aboriginal perspectives in Canadian classrooms. This document endeavors to assist educators in helping to address racism with educational institutions and beyond. You can learn more about anti-racism programs and news by visiting the CRRF website. And we'll get a chance to look at that um, in a bit. Okay. So this area is just loaded. Um, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. Um, and then educational institutions. So increasingly, many public educational institutions are endeavoring to provide programming and curriculum that provides the opportunity to investigate issues pertaining to Native American people with a critical vantage point. Several are listed here for your consideration. First Nation Studies at the University of Western Ontario, teaching First Nation student at the Faculty of Education and University of, I think that must be Waterloo, Ontario, Lakehead University Department of Aboriginal Education. So, right now, though, I want to show you a little video that I got pulled up. This one right here. And another way to break the uh, stereotype myth, or the myth created by stereotypes, is to uh, produce informative videos. And here, PBS is a really cool outfit down in the United States, public broadcasting. They always try to, or they endeavor to produce honest programming. So, what does authentically indigenous look like? Let's watch this. I think I have enough time. 10 minutes, 46. Yes, let's finish up the class today with this video.
Hey, I'm Cheyenne Barefoot, member of the Chiricahua Apache Nation and your host of Sovereign Innovations. There are 574 federally recognized tribes within the United States, and hundreds more the United States chooses not to recognize. And no two look or dress the same. For example, look at the difference in clothing between Ohlone women of the California Bay Area and the traditional dress for southwestern Navajo or Dene women and men. Now contrast that with the protective clothing of the Inuit people. As you can see, some materials like feathers, beads, and hides are used intertribally, but not always in the same way, making the clothing design for each tribal nation uniquely different. So if there's all this rich, real-life representation, why are we so often reduced to the same image? Well, it's kind of got to do with these guys right here. George Catlin, Edward S. Curtis, and William Buffalo Bill Cody. Long story short, Catlin was a painter obsessed with capturing this authentic image of Native American people he visited across the United States during the 1830s. His Indian gallery collection showcases over 500 pieces that center his Eurocentric lens for understanding us. Between 1900 and 1930, Edward S. Curtis was also obsessed with capturing this authentic image of indigenous peoples before they all vanished. He photographed more than 70 tribes across the US, but his images grossly romanticized us. He staged scenes and mismatched cultural items between tribes to fit the story he wanted to make. Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows are another inaccurate depiction of indigenous people. He showcased us as violent instigators when really, we were the ones undergoing genocide. So it's thanks in part to these guys that these one-dimensional and misleading images of indigenous people have proliferated so widely. The content was assumed to be factual rather than what it is, a performance, or only half of the story. To date, they've informed millions of people about what we are and what we should look like. And many non-indigenous people today are still obsessed with consuming the authentic indigenous cultures they've been fascinated by for centuries, no matter how fabricated it is. Which brings us back to fashion. Perhaps nobody is better at fabricating indigenous cultures than clothing brands. Companies frequently appropriate cultural iconography, hairstyles, motifs, prints, and designs, you name it, and they've stolen it to reproduce something that's mid at best. From people wearing Plains Tribes war bonnets at music festivals, to that George Lucas guy taking inspiration from the Hopi women's squash blossom hairstyle for Princess Leia's space buns, to the popular Minnetonka moccasins those hipsters wear, and of course, Halloween costumes for every person who wants to be us but doesn't want to put in the effort to understand us. Oftentimes, indigenous communities don't receive credit or compensation despite being the key inspiration for these brands. Elias Not Afraid, an Apsaloka beater and fashion designer who's had his work featured at the Santa Fe Indian Market and recently on the cover of British Vogue, shared with me his experience of non-native companies attempting to replicate his work.
Yeah, it's disheartening because, now what I've noticed was, this is actually something that happened just recently. A company out in India reached out to me and was trying to ask me permission to use my beadwork designs so they could do replicas of it using beadwork because they know they're teaching themselves how to bead and they're going to try to sell it for, cheap
Elias isn't the only one with an opinion on the cultural appropriation of indigenous items. Joey Montoya, a member of the Lipan Apache Nation and CEO and founder of indigenous clothing brand Urban Native Era, shared his perspective on the decades-old issue.
And I think those folks that are appropriating are not truly connected to who they are. They tend to look at other things that are connected, that have this meaning and purpose to it, and meaning and purpose that's rooted in like thousands of years of like learning of ceremonies and all these things that they're not just like, if we didn't just create this 500 years ago like the U.S. was created. We've been developing our culture and who we are as indigenous people for so many years, so it's deeply rooted in the world.
At a glance, you might think it's humorous or not a big deal, but it's actually more harmful than you might think. A lot of the elements in indigenous clothing, like regalia and ceremonial dress, hold significant value and purpose. And when brands exploit that for the purpose of trendy fashion and capitalism, it can be incredibly offensive and inappropriate because they're disregarding that value and also ignoring some of the historical trauma we've undergone. But we haven't taken this nonsense sitting down. Oh no. Indigenous communities have been outspoken against cultural appropriation for at least the past 8 decades. When the National Congress of American Indians created a campaign to eliminate negative stereotyping of indigenous peoples in the media in the 1940s. Eventually, they'd narrow their scope to specifically discuss sports mascots and team names. Their overarching argument, simply put, is that the racist names and co-opting of iconography was incredibly offensive and hinged on untrue assumptions about indigenous peoples. But they weren't the only ones in our communities who were trying to do something about the ways people were perceiving us. Indigenous fashion designers are pushing back against the myth of the monolithic Indian with their innovative styles that often blend traditional indigenous designs with a reinvented modern twist.
If our ancestors were here currently, what would they be designing? What resources would they be using to really create, what they want to wear and what they see as of importance, and what also will change too, because I believe, our ancestors adapted to the environment and used those resources, and they would have done the same thing if they were placed in this time or in the future. They would have done that same thing of just really observing the world again and really figuring out what we should be wearing, what needs to change and shift.
Of course, the design process varies from person to person. Ty Lodgepole, a Navajo fashion designer of Homeland and member of Indigenous Enterprise, is creating designs that reference his traditional upbringing.
A lot of people's mood boards are our people, which is kind of crazy. So it's like, why not do the same, but in a respectful, tasteful way? What you would see, old pictures of, our, ancestors, the Navajos, and also, let's say, Apaches. That's really like a cut off, almost capri jort. And in my mind, that's like, it's super dope to see, because jorts are like a popping thing right now, is making its little comeback, and that kind of resonates to everybody. But little do they know, like, once you peel back the layers of it just be looking cool, there's a reference point, there's a story behind it.
If we stay repeating the same designs that are like in collections and museums and stuff, we're basically just being held back in the past.
Remixing and adapting is such a huge part of Indigenous fashion in order to really tap into the full range of expression. And the reclamation process looks and means something different to each designer. Indigenous fashion can function as a subtle or direct reference point for one's tribe. And these Indigenous designers are giving folks in our communities a new way to represent themselves and reject decades of misleading tropes. But apparently we're not the only ones jazzed by these bold forms of representation and reclamation. Over the past several years, Native folks have found ourselves occupying spaces we've historically been left out of. You can now see the work of Indigenous designers featured on runways in New York and Paris. You can spot Indigenous models and actors like Quanah Chasing Horse and Lily Gladstone on the cover of magazines and on your TV screens.
I didn't know they were going to put it on the cover or even use my stuff per se. So yeah, they and said, "Okay, we're gonna use this for a photo shoot with Lily Gladstone," and that was all. And then I found out the day they posted it on the British Vogue Instagram. I was like, "Oh."
When I create something, I'm hoping there's a native kid or just somebody out there watching, and in their minds they're like, oh, I'm gonna go crazier than that. I'm gonna do something better than that.
Saw like three or four people wearing our hat. So it's nice to like know that like we have people in these spaces that support what we're doing and also support the bigger vision.
It's taken decades of individual and collective action to get to where we are now. And although Indigenous representation has come such a long way, many Indigenous folks feel the work isn't over. Right now, we're experiencing an incredible resurgence of Indigenous image. And it's not one size fits all. As a reconnecting urban native, all of these options make me feel seen, and they give me choices so I don't feel pressured to fit in with dominant Western culture. I can be outspoken with my clothing expression and unapologetically me, whatever that looks like. Now I want to hear from you. How are your choices centering you while also honoring your traditions? See ya in the comments.
Okay, so that's a enlightening video on how the people are using the arts and pushing the traditional aspect of art forms into the present and the future they plan on. These are all young people, right? These are young people, designers and artists who are recreating this image of what they perceive as indigenous peoples. So, uh, this is exactly how you combat racism, right? You uh, create an image that is the antithesis, the opposite of what the stereotype has historically presented in the movies, and you don't see those uh, being seen that much anymore. Those negative stereotypes, any type of movie that's being produced that I've seen recently doesn't contain these uh, monological, is that a word? Monological? Stereotypes. I don't know if that's actually a word. I should look that up someday. Uh, anyways, I hope you enjoyed that video and our introduction to stereotypes today. Tomorrow we'll continue on. We'll look at um, some other organizations and newspapers, organizations, programs that are available for Indigenous peoples. And then, of course, we'll discuss our key questions, um, which we didn't look at today. But I think up to this point, you still have lots of uh, work to finish off from the previous key questions. Um, anyways, thanks for listening in today. I hope you enjoyed our class, and we will be back tomorrow at the same time. Uh, have a great evening, everyone. We'll talk to you then. Bye for now.